Hey folks, here are OS Reviews. You're watching our retro review of the HTC EVO View 4G. This is the Sprint version of the HTC Flyer, which was a 7-inch Android tablet released in 2011 by HTC, the first ever HTC tablet in fact. Back then it was quite pricey, and it was sold for about $400 for the 16GB model, and that's with a 2-year service agreement. So the HTC Flyer, without the 4G connectivity component, Wi-Fi only, could be picked up for $500 with the 16GB model. Otherwise, it ran on Google version 2.3 and had a capacitive screen, and what made the EVO View 4G and also the Flyer unique is because it had a pen component which could be purchased optionally. It was not included in the box. For $80, allowed you to use it as a active kind of stylus for drawing and doodling, and it's a pressure sensitive stylus as well, which can be great for graphic artists. Otherwise, you can see that the tablet itself is incredibly well built because it's basically the same design philosophy that was used by HTC in their more premium and high-end phones, which is to say there is a unibody aluminum shell casting the entire body that creates a very heavy tablet in the hands despite the smaller 7-inch display. The back also houses a 5.0 megapixel autofocus enabled camera without an LED flash, but you could release this mechanism on the side to access a microSD expansion slot for a larger amount of memory. There's also access to a 3.5mm headphone jack and also stereo speakers that were quite loud and rich despite being placed on the back. So all in all, a very attractive design. You can see all the buttons, the volume rockers, as well as the power switches that also dubbed as the LED indicator light were very easy to use. One element of the EVO View 4G that we were not fans of was the proprietary port for charging and for syncing. It's unfortunate that HTC didn't just go with a typical micro USB, but they had to go with kind of a custom version of that. So not a huge fan of that, and overall it's a pretty formidable weight because of this metal look and finish. And there's almost a slight curve on the edges as well because HTC likes to employ their curved chin designs that protrudes from either sides of the screen. The front also features a front-facing camera for video chatting, and that's basically the design. Very clean look. So hardware-wise, what's also unique about this tablet is it has 2 arrays of capacitive controls for controlling the home, the menu, and the back. So depending on the orientation by using the accelerometer, you can see that these 2 sets can change positions, which is quite cool. Kind of a nifty novelty, but of course if they used on-screen controls, virtual screen controls, that would have been easier as well as more cost-effective. One thing we did like about this tablet at the time was the drag-down notification drawer because it took advantage of the larger screen size by including more elements that you would typically use, such as quick launch settings in addition to notifications, as well as your commonly used apps, which was quite cool. Here we have access to turn on various functions like Wi-Fi for the 4G functionality. There's Bluetooth, but there isn't GPS built onto this unit. There is a proximity sensor which will automatically dim and brighten the screen as necessary under certain lighting environments. This tablet in particular did have a huge problem with the screen in the sense that it's a fingerprint magnet, so as you start using it, it's going to attract a layer of fingerprint and dust, which was a bit unfortunate despite being quite bright, and HTC always does a good job with the viewing angles, so pretty impressive for bringing back images and videos and web browsing, but you do have to clean it rather regularly. So the main menu here, you can see it's very heavily customized by HTC Sense, which is one of the better skins on the market, at least at the time. You can see that HTC Sense has definitely evolved over the years, because right now it's very clean and almost stock Android, but back then it definitely was not. You had this carousel view of the 3D icons which spun around. It was quite fun to see, but definitely drained the battery a bit faster. Speaking of, the battery on here can last for about, I would say, 4 to 5 hours before you need to recharge it again, which isn't bad, but again, it's a 7-inch tablet as opposed to 10 inches, so there's less screen to work with as well. Down below here, there's commonly used apps such as watching streaming video. There's an ebook reader on here as well with preloaded titles that switched and were quite easy to use. There's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. There's also The Scarlet Letter, A Tale of Two Cities, Dracula, and if you see a title that you like to read, you can simply tap on it, and it creates the illusion of reading an actual book quite well. Obviously, the hefty weight combined with the use of an IPS screen as opposed to an e-ink screen does make it a bit less ideal than using, as a regular ebook reading tool for novels, just because there's a bit more of an eye strain and just not as easy on the hands because it's so heavy. But it is nice it's a nice feature to have nonetheless, and if you have the pen, you could use it to easily annotate and add notes. There's also access to a dedicated notes app application, which you can sync with Evernote, which is pretty nice. And you can see here that there is a welcome note that they show you the sample images as well as text and voice things, voice recording elements that you can add in, as well as sketches that you can use with the pen. So moving into some of the other aspects of the tablet next, here in 2016, I wouldn't really recommend this tablet unless you get it for, I would say, under 30 or 40 bucks, just because you no longer have access to all the latest elements from the Google Play Store. You still are stuck with the older Google Market, which is no longer compatible with a ton of apps that you would want. However, some apps you can still load older versions on here. They do run fine, but in terms of specifications, we are talking about a single core processor clocked at 1.5 gigahertz and 1 gig of DDR2 RAM. So those are not heavyweight specifications even at the time for doing super graphically intensive games and 3D games and a ton of multitasking, although some will work. So that's something to quickly note. As a media consumption product for streaming YouTube, for Hulu, for quick video, for Skype calls, those things all work just fine. But again, not the most compatible thing for game playback anymore. Checking out the web browser next, we have access to a fairly standard browser experience here. The keyboard here is nice and large. It's a stock HTC keyboard, which was quite responsive, and it does load the full desktop version of sites out of the box, which we like to see. And again, there's Flash support, so you can view back embedded videos and images as well as elements in more complex sites like the New York Times, although loading took significantly longer than some faster dual-core and quad-core processors that you might find. So here we have access to pinch and zoom, which is quite lucid and responsive. You can view back also videos directly by accessing YouTube. So all those things make this a fairly good web browser, even by today's standards, although the speeds are not going to be quite as nice just because the processing power is kind of limited here. But you can use both Wi-Fi or 4G if you're out and about and don't have a hotspot. So as a web browser, it still does a good job. You have access to tab browsing on the top. You have a incognito mode. Of course, you can download Chrome if you want to, change things up a bit, and you can access your Gmail as well. Taking a look at some of the preloaded apps, there are a few elements of bloatware that you can find here, both by HTC and also by Sprint. So there's things like Blockbuster, there's your Sprint apps as well. There's demo versions of a few games like Nfs Shift for racing. It uses the accelerometer. We'll take a look at that in a moment. There's also the standard array of Google apps in addition to Polaris Office, which allows you to view back your Word, Excel, and PowerPoint for an added amount of productivity, and also some things like created by HTC like Teeter, which is another quick app that you can use to test out the accelerometer, and HTC Footprints for saving back your videos and photos. So taking a quick look at the camera first, again at 5 megapixels, it's not great, but as far as tablet cameras go, it's actually pretty decent. Images are pretty fast to be captured. You can easily share them, easily edit them, and also change modes and settings and add filters, as well as record video at 720p. The front-facing camera is decent, although you need to be in brighter lit environments for it to really be effective for voice conferencing, and there is a active noise canceling mic on here that's a good job even under noisier environments. So the camera, pretty good for a tablet. Otherwise, taking a quick look at the YouTube client on here, again, there's also a few other HTC things like HTC Stream, HTC Likes. We can tap on YouTube next, and we are greeted to a rather old version of the YouTube app by 2016 standards. It still works. You can still definitely play back your videos just fine, and it loads it up in an up to 720p resolution and does work pretty nicely along with the speakers in the back. But again, it's not the fastest thing in the world anymore. But again, a decent video playback experience can be found on here. Other things that you'll see, Google Maps is on here, HTC Hub, Polaris Office, again, Snap Booth. If we take a look at Teeter, so some of the games on here, this is actually found since the early days of Windows Mobile, and HTC always seems to use this. So you have this ball that you have to navigate through the maze. Here we can see that the screen, it's an IPS panel. It does have a slightly purple tint. Pretty good screen, and as far as resolution is concerned, in terms of pixels per inch, but outdoors you can see it glares and it becomes less visible just because of that fingerprint magnet kind of attracting to the top and the surface. So pretty fun game to test out the accelerometer and also to kind of practice your skills in navigating using the gravity sensor on board. Otherwise, if we take a look at the Nfs Shift Game here, this is a good example, I would say, of a more graphically intensive game, but you still have to kind of download this. This is just it seems like a demo version, and then it tries to pull it through the web or through the Play Store, so that's going to take a bit longer. Otherwise, there's doodling apps on here as well as note-taking apps, exclusive because you can use the pen, and it creates a pretty fluent experience. There's a PDF viewer for more productivity, some GPS apps, although it uses a GPS and not full GPS for turn-by-turn navigation, and you can also sort them by frequent and also your downloaded and favorite applications. So pretty easy to use all in all. So at the end of the day, the HTC EVO View 4G, or the HTC Flyer, it's a notable tablet just because HTC decided to make their first tablet a 7-inch variant as opposed to, let's say, a 9.7 or a 10-inch variant. They also didn't use Honeycomb as an operating system and instead went for a mobile platform and essentially made one of the earlier phablets that we saw, basically just a phone design, except it doesn't have the phone functionality. It was overpriced at that time, but HTC did make a beautiful piece of hardware from the design perspective, and it still works fairly well in today's standards if you don't expect lightning fast speed, although a lot of the app support is now gone. Thanks for watching this retro look back and retro review here at OS Reviews of the HTC EVO View 4G and the HTC Flyer.